I'm Dr. Eileen Hale, the COO of TTELT, Teaching Tips for English Language Teachers. We also have another board member with us today, Kira Sage. Would you like to introduce yourself, Kira?
Hi, I'm Kira Sage, and I am the CDO of TTELT.
And together we're going to be interviewing Mark Hancock, who specializes in pronunciation tips for teachers. And we will allow Mark to give a formal introduction of himself. Welcome, Mark. Can you please just give us a little background for our audience and listeners, where you are?
Yeah, I'm over in a small island across the Atlantic, England, United Kingdom. That's where I was born and raised. And then I moved abroad when I started teaching English. I went first of all to Sudan and then Turkey and Brazil. Brazil was where I started with the business of getting interested specifically in pronunciation. I'll tell you a bit about that later. And then after that, went to Madrid in Spain for 20 years or so. And I recently returned to live here in Chester in England and been working from Chester ever since. I do teaching and teacher training. And most of all, I guess I'm an author. I've written quite a lot of books, course books and stuff, but also specifically about pronunciation. So I can tell you about those if you like. But only if you ask me.
Yes, wonderful. Let's jump into what you'd like to share with our audience, teachers from around the world. Specific aspects of pronunciation. You mentioned a couple examples you might give to our listeners.
Yeah, I was thinking about the questions you're asking me about what's so powerful about pronunciation games. And I want to make the point that there are at least three kinds of things that pronunciation is. And it's not one thing like a lot of people imagine. And so I'd like to describe three types of pronunciation activity, games, if you like, that focus on different areas of pronunciation. So the first I would call puzzles. Puzzles are specifically intended to help the learners understand things, to raise awareness. It's about brain work, because part of pronunciation is brain work. And then there are pair works. Pair works are the kinds of activities where pronunciation is used to communicate. So there are activities which help students to understand that pronunciation creates meaning. It's not just for decoration, right? It's not just a question of a pretty accent. It's a question of getting your meaning across. And then the third type of activity, which I'm going to call poems, but it includes any kind of text, really, chants, raps. These are really good for articulation work, for the muscle that you need, the muscular movement that you need to create sounds, and also to remember how they sound, so both speaking and listening. So they're very different focuses and all are important. And you need to think about all of those three things when you're teaching pronunciation. You need to work out what the students need and then work out the best way to deal with it. So can I just show you one example of each of those? Would that be all right?
Sure, that'd be wonderful.
Okay, so this is an example of a maze. And for those people who can't see this, who are listening to the podcast, this is a maze. It's a grid of squares with A in the top left-hand corner and B in the bottom right-hand corner. And all of the squares have words in them. So the objective is to go from the top left to the bottom right, going through the squares only if they contain a word with the target sound. In this case, the target sound is the vowel sound A. So if you, up in the top left corner, you've got the phoneme A, and then you have a choice. You can either go down to have in the box below, or across to gave in the box to the right. Which one of those two words has the vowel sound A? Have or gave? Hopefully your students are now going to draw a pencil line on, or draw their finger across if you're doing it on screen, to the word gave, and then they've got further choices they can carry on down, going through until they reach the end. And all of the words in the path have this vowel sound in the middle. The next stage, though, is that once you've got the students to do the puzzle, the most important thing is to get them to reflect on it. Look at the spelling of the words in the correct path. How many different spellings are there for this sound A? So in gave, for example, you've got A something E. That's your first spelling for A. The next word is plain, so that has the same pattern. But the word after that is plain with AI in it. Actually, the same pronunciation as plain, but two different spellings. Really weird, right? Sometimes students can't believe that those two words have the same pronunciation because the spelling is different. And this is the point about puzzles like this, is to raise awareness of patterns in English, in this case, spelling patterns. So when you do this kind of puzzle, make sure you talk through the learning point, which is different spelling patterns. That's the first type of activity, but it's all brain work. If you give it to your students, you can see them. They're sort of doing it maybe in silence. Usually they sub-vocalize to themselves. So they're doing kind of mental pronunciation, which is weird, right? We don't normally think of pronunciation as being a mental thing, but this is mental pronunciation, and it's important. So that was the first type of thing. It's an example of a puzzle. The second kind of activity is what I've called a pair work. Let me find an example of that. Oh yeah, here we go. This is a street map, and it's a grid of streets in a map. You've got 2 streets going top to bottom, and then 4 streets going horizontally. And the names of the streets are rather tricky because they're a bit similar to each other. You've got Tab Street, and then below that you've got Tap Street, Tab Street, Tap Street. So it could be a little bit confusing for some learners of English because they sound rather similar, yeah? You've got Rib Street and Rip Street, and then the verticals, Robe Street and Rope Street. So here you can see that we're focusing on the difference between 2 consonants, the B and P, which are particularly tricky for some learners. For example, Arabic-speaking learners have big difficulty with that. In Arabic, there's no difference between those 2 consonants. But also the vowel is slightly shorter in front of the P. So the vowel sound is slightly different in those 2. Tap Street, Tab Street. So a lot of learners find difficulty with these consonants at the end of a word particularly. So the objective in the game then is to give directions to one of these coffee bars, which are A, B, C, D. They're marked on the map with letters of the alphabet. You explain how to get to one of those coffee bars, and then the listener, the student, has to tell you which bar they've gone to. So if I say, for example, it's on the corner of Tab Street and Rope Street, where do you think we've got to? Okay, Kyra, you're lost, I guess. Eileen, how are you doing?
I can imagine. It's pretty funny. You get some comical laughter in the classroom as well.
Yeah, but I'm asking you, which coffee bar am I talking about? Can you see it?
Are we at the B bar?
Yes. Okay, so there you go. That's a communication game. It's designed so that it focuses on a specific pronunciation point. So you can do it where you tell the students which bar to go to in the way I just did. Do that a few times. See if students have any problems. If they have a problem, then try to explain the difference in pronunciation to them. And then one of the students in your class, they can say one of the places, and then you have to say which one it is. So it reverses the order. And then if you've got more than one student, you can do it in a breakout room, or if you're in a real classroom, you get them in pairs, doing it in pair work. And the great thing about this activity is that it focuses on getting the meaning across. There is no right or wrong. There's no correct or incorrect. It's simply, does it work? And that to me is the crucial point about pronunciation. It's not about accent. It's about, does it work? Can you get your meaning across? So this kind of activity focuses on that communication.
That sounds very effective. That's great activity. Thank you.
So that's an example of one of these pair works I'm talking about, a map in this case. And then the third type of activity, totally contrasting to those two. And it reminds me a little bit of what Eileen, you were talking about in one of the previous podcasts, which were the jazz chants, right?
Yeah,
As an example. So you won't get fit just sitting on a seat. If you want to get fit, got to get up on your feet. Don't fill that seat, got to move a little bit. Kick your feet to the beat, feel the heat. That's it. You won't get fit just sitting on a seat. If you want to get fit, got to get up on your feet. Don't fill that seat, got to move a little bit. Kick your feet to the beat, feel the heat. That's it.
Awesome.
So this kind of thing, you would do it like you'd say one line and the students repeat. You can say shorter parts as well. If the students are having difficulty, you can just do little bits like on a loop, like on a seat, 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 like that. So you can drill it, get the students repeating. And the focus here is articulation, they're getting their tongues around the foreign language here. So this is great for speaking, muscular work, also for getting their ears adjusted, because they're very memorable, these kind of things. So they can kind of hear in their inner ear long after you've finished. It's going round in their head. This particular example, by the way, has a focus as well, in addition, on the difference between E and I, as in feet and fit. So there are plenty of examples of pairs with that difference in them. So this kind of activity, I think, complements the other two. The three of them work together. Yeah.
Definitely. Do you design these all yourself?
Yeah. I've been at it a long time though.
Yeah. They take a lot of work to create. You have a lot of creativity. It's like being a songwriter to create these sort of like jazz chants.
I don't think it's a rocket science. You know, that maze, you can make your own mazes. It's just a grid of squares. All you have to do, or your student, you can get students to make their own for their colleagues to do. You have to just think of a list of words with the target sound in them. For the street map, you just have to invent some names of streets.
Yeah.
Just invent names that have differences that your students have difficulty with. And for these kind of raps, well, maybe that one's a little bit difficult to come up with, but let me just show you an example of one that you can make for yourself quite easily, I think. See if I can find it. Oh, I haven't got it, but just like this, a list of fruit, pears and peaches, figs and dates, oranges and kiwis, plums and grapes. Say that a few times and it starts to sound like Frère Jacques, the French traditional song.
Yeah.
And it's easy to make your own like that. And it's got some great examples of linking pears and peaches, zum peaches, plural endings, and linking pears and peaches. So really easy to make. You can just exploit one sentence out of your course book. If you repeat it a few times, it starts to sound like a chant. It's magic that way. So yeah, you might say that it takes a lot of work to make these things, but I think you can do it for yourself quite easily.
That's wonderful. These are fabulous examples. Thank you for sharing them.
And sharing the magic of how we can create our own based off of whatever teaching context for our teachers out there.
Mm.
For those teachers who may not be quite as creative as you, like how did you get started in this, specializing in pronunciation and working with certain sounds, particularly related to language backgrounds? You mentioned Spanish and other language backgrounds, Arabic. How did you focus your teaching? If you have more than one student group in your class with different language backgrounds, how do you address the different issues that they might have difficulties with based on their first language?
Okay, lots of questions there.
One, sorry.
Okay, first off with the history. The history was I was working in Brazil in a network of language schools called Cultura Inglesa, and I had some administrative hours, and they said, "Can you make some materials for teaching pronunciation?" And so I started that way. It didn't come from me; it came from them. They said, "Do this and that," and I just did it, and that eventually led to this book, which was Pronunciation Games, 1995. This came out, but that's how it started in Brazil, and I just naturally wanted to find a way of communicating about pronunciation that doesn't have to be academic. A lot of the material around at the time and still today has a very academic look about it, which is off-putting, makes people think, well, that's not for me. I don't think that's necessary at all. The kind of approach I've just demonstrated with those 3 activities, I think, shows you that it doesn't have to be academic at all. And it can be fun. In fact, I'm fairly convinced that it's the most fun part of any lesson if you do it right, because it takes you away from, it's heads up, isn't it? It takes you away from texts and grammar and stuff. It's the only part of language teaching which is both physical and mental. So it crosses the barrier, and I think that's makes it very varied and interesting. Now let me see if I can remember any more of your question. You asked about different language groups, right?
In the same classroom. So you have Spanish speakers, Arabic speakers, and Chinese speakers all in the same classroom. How do you address the different linguistic challenges that they have based on their first language?
Well, if you're teaching somewhere like the United States or UK, you're likely to have learners from different backgrounds. If you're teaching in Brazil or Spain, probably they all have the same language background. That kind of makes it easier in one way. If they're all from the same language background, you can work out all of the tricks of the trade relating to that particular language background. Like if it's Spanish, you can work out all of the things which Spanish learners typically have a problem with, and you can focus on them. The downside is that the students can understand each other perfectly well, even though their pronunciation would not be understood outside of a Spanish-speaking country. So it doesn't give them the experience of trying to communicate. They can always slip into Spanish. So yeah, there's pros and cons of that, but you're asking specifically about teaching in a circumstance where you have learners from a range of backgrounds. You've got to do everything you can, in my opinion, to do your homework on the language backgrounds of the students in front of you. And that may be a big ask if you've got 20 different ones. But typically in the classes I do here, there are maybe 3 Russians, 2 people from Thailand, 1 from an Arabic speaking country, and maybe a Spanish speaker. That kind of maybe 3, 4, 5 different language backgrounds in the typical class for me. And I try to do a bit of research on the typical problems of those language backgrounds. You can just type on on the Google search, you know, typical pronunciation problems of Thailand speakers of English, and you can usually find something there, some information. Or you can, there are books like Michael Swan's Learner English. They have chapters on different language backgrounds. So do as much as you can. And if you haven't had time to do that, or it's that you can't find information, you're just going to have to try and find a way of finding out from the students themselves, or just be observant, watch and see what happened, the kind of thing that student has a problem with. And usually you can do a number of different pronunciation points at once. And that way there's something for everybody. For example, you might teach a group of vowel sounds, 5 or 6 different vowel sounds in one class. And one student might have a problem with that vowel sound, another student with that vowel sound. If you have a range of things, that's one way of dealing with what you might call mixed background classes.
Yeah.
Give a multi-focus pronunciation lesson. As for the feedback, you can sometimes get the students to actually teach each other. So if you have a student from Japan who has trouble with L, R, you can get somebody from a Spanish-speaking background who doesn't have that problem. You can get them trying to teach. And it's a great way of sharing out the responsibility. And because, as you know, teaching is a great way of learning as well. So everyone benefits.
Definitely. Those are excellent answers for all of our questions. We really appreciate these tips you've given to our teachers. So just to wrap up this segment of your sharing pronunciation tips for our teachers around the world, do you want to say any final tips for teachers, or give any quick summary for what would be most useful for teachers that don't have the repertoire of expertise that you have? How do they start? What do they focus on?
Well, I would think the first thing is don't worry about accent. In my view, accent is not what we're about here. So if the student has an accent, but they're perfectly intelligible, there's no problem. You don't need to, if it's not broken, you don't need to fix it. And accent is not the objective, the goal of pronunciation teaching. Pronunciation teaching is about helping learners to be better understood and to understand better. That's another point I would like to make, that almost more important than speaking, pronunciation teaching is about listening. So let's say that you teach your students about the difference between E and I in one lesson, fit and feet. And then the next lesson, they're back to the same way they were before. And you go, oh my God, this is not working, is it? Don't despair, because the student may not be enacting it in their spoken output, but they've got it, they're aware, they'll be aware of the problem. So if they get misunderstood one day, they'll go, that's because of that thing the teacher was telling us about with the E and the I. Okay, so I'll say it again more carefully. It's just as much about listening and awareness as it is about actually picking things up right away, which doesn't happen. So don't despair when they don't pick up the things you've just taught them. It doesn't work that way.
That's a really good point.
One last point there. When you're teaching pronunciation, don't talk like a robot. Just try and speak in a natural way. And I know that's difficult when you're focusing on yourself. You're focusing on the way you're speaking naturally when you're teaching pronunciation. But some teachers, they start to speak in a very, very, very clear and in a unnatural sort of robotic way. Don't do that. Try to be natural in your pronunciation when you're teaching pronunciation.
Great tips. We thank you very much for all your expertise that you're sharing with us. Are there specific website links where people can go to access your books and resources that you use in your classroom that might share with others?
I could mention, I've got two websites here. Can you see those? Yeah.
Yep.
You can see I came prepared for this question. There's pronpack.com.
Can you spell that for us?
PRON, short for pronunciation.
I will make a slide of this. Could you just bring it a little bit? Perfect. Okay.
I'll have to move.
I got all the letters there, and then I'll make a slide.
Pronpack.com. And then the other one was Hancock MacDonald. Hancock is my surname. MacDonald, as in hamburgers, MacDonald. Hancock MacDonald, one word, .com. So the first one is actually a support website for Pronpack, the books that I've written, and Hancock MacDonald is just a general website with loads of articles, materials and stuff, all for free. So yeah, that's that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time, Mark. We've been a wonderful resource for us and for all of our listeners. We hope you may join us for a future workshop. Kira, any last words for this segment you'd like to summarize?
I love your three-part system, and it's so cool how that not only do you have this system, but you have opened up different methods for others and how they can adapt it to their classroom and their specific situation. And this is phenomenal. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Stay tuned for Jen's workshop, Saturday, August 21st at noon Eastern Standard Time. We'd love you to join us for details, in-depth discussion on how to integrate Big Talk into your classroom. She'll give us more resources and give you the chance as educators to participate in a Big Talk. So please join Jen. Also, the end of this month, we have our TTELT talks every Saturday. At the last Saturday of the month will be August 28th, either at noon and or 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Again, we're offering 2 time zones to capture all of our listeners around the world. 12 noon and or 5 o'clock. You're welcome to join both if you'd like, but please join one if possible. Saturday, August 28th. Register for both the workshop and TTELT talks on our website ahead of time under the events tab. Thanks so much for joining us in this podcast, and we hope you can join Jen's live workshop. Register on our webpage, again, ttelt.org. Email us with any of your ideas, tongue twister, tteltinfo@gmail.com. Thanks so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day.